Okay, it started.
Oh, there it goes. All right. How's it going, everybody? Today is the first day of Kang's History Month. How's your Kang's History Month going so
We
far,
were
Oso?
kangs and shit.
What was his name? Chris Brown, who made the point that
Oh fuck,
Kang's History Month gets the shortest month of the year.
dude! I
Freaking.
was, I was about to do the fucking edgiest thing ever last night, and I'm not going to discuss what that is until it happens, maybe,
Uh,
because it's not anything like illegal. It's just it was gonna basically be all over the news, and it did have to do with Kang's History Month, but I just got tired because it was like 2 in the morning, and I decided not to.
yeah, it's probably a good idea. But I would strongly recommend that you don't talk about it until like a week after you do it.
All right.
Preferably a week after it starts to gain attention.
Yeah, it's gonna be fucking funny, and it's probably gonna be all over the news. So,
Well, I look forward to seeing it, and if it does, I am just going to laugh hysterically and maybe even
and
do a video about
that's
like how
all I'm
horrible and outrageous it is.
that that's all I'm going to say about it. Is it has to do with Kang's History Month, and it's gonna particularly make the people on the so-called left side of the political aisle up in arms.
It's going to be amazing. But anyways, before we started the stream, we were just talking about you were saying that the you think the market's going to collapse this summer.
Oh yeah, that's not something that I could say necessarily with certainty, but if you notice the market corrections, like every time the stock market, the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, it goes up a little bit. That's as a result of the Fed trying to manipulate the interest rates, of course. And every time that it does that, you'll notice the correction gets a little smaller and it lasts a shorter amount of time. Have you been noticing how that's been going on lately?
Me personally, no. Truth be told, I don't pay attention to the stock market all that much, especially since it's not a
Okay,
real
well,
indicator of economic health.
right, right. That's a decent point, but my I think that it's not going to be very long before it starts going in the negatives. You start seeing these corrections, no matter what the Fed's going to be able to make the rates go up again because they're going to be at negative interest rate. So I think that I would guess the summer, but I mean it could happen sooner or later. Point is, I think that that point is going to happen soon, and however long it takes for the market collapse to occur after that is up for speculation, but it's not going to be too late.
What makes
And keep
this
in mind that keep in mind right now that every industry is in a bubble. So if you thought the 1929 Great Depression was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet.
what makes this market interesting is well, you heard the term the everything bubble being used right now, but what's very special is how over leveraged everything is. Now, just to break down the financing terms, leverage refers to the assets that people hold in non liquid things, as in things that cannot be bartered as cash. So, for example, real estate, your car, uh, I don't know, what other valuable assets might you have that you can't transfer as cash without invoking the problem of the double coincidence of wants. So basically, just hard assets. Even more important is that stocks are a hard asset. You can only trade with people who want that stock. And people have a tremendous amount of these stocks. They have a tremendous amount of debt and all of these other hard assets. And then you can find article after article after article, financial commentators pointing this out constantly. It's like something around very small percentages of Americans even have $500 in savings. Everybody is just put into a huge spending mode. Gotta spend, gotta spend, gotta spend. Which is, of course, the logical conclusion of the low interest rates that the Federal Reserve has been forcing the economy to have since the 2008 financial crash. The inevitable result has been, oh hey, hey Postal, you're back. Hello?
I don't see anybody.
I heard the piano, so I just assumed it was him.
That was me getting a notification on my phone. So I got a new phone recently, and I haven't changed my ringtone, so that's the default.
All right, but as I was saying, yeah, you have huge you have huge numbers of people who have large numbers of assets in the stock market right now. You have a large amount of money that is being forced into the stock market because it's a lot more profitable to do so because that's how the taxes are structured. You can either have money in income, which is taxed at 30%, or you can have money in capital gains, which is taxed at 15%. I'll let you figure out which one's preferable. But once the stock market does crash, and it is at a historic high, but as the laws of physics dictate, what goes up must come down, and when it comes down, let's just say
Well,
that those savings that the people don't have, they're going to really wish that they had it at the time.
well, especially considering that no one's actually really gaining anything. There's no growth occurring. It's just constant spending, and that the 2008 recession never actually ended. The government just bailed out the banks, and the banks used the money that the government gave them to invest all this empty money back into the market. So, I mean, that was the moment that the everything bubble started, and that was over a decade ago. So, how long it's been going on, what caused it, and just the condition overall that society and the market are in. I I think it's yeah, it's not going to be pretty,
It's,
and we're guaranteed to see a market crash soon here. That's
well,
absolutely not fear mongering like some people have referred to it.
we're going to be talking we're going to be talking about Watch the Other Hand, but I want to mention another thing that Glenn Beck used to say back when he was, tolerable.
That's probably the smartest thing he's ever said is watch the other hand. I don't know if he came up with that phrase, but probably not considering some of the other stuff this guy has said, but yeah, it's probably the best advice he's ever given, and I'm kind of surprised that someone on a network which is run by the CIA would even be allowed to say that.
Keep in mind he was on CNN before he was on Fox.
Both both of them are controlled by the CIA, so
Yeah, pretty much, and I completely forgot what I was going to say. It's something about let's see, we were talking about this. I lost my train of thought. We were going into the
well,
stock
you
market.
said that you were talking about Glenn Beck, and we're getting into Watch the Other Hand, one of those segments.
Yeah, but I wasn't going to talk about Watch the Other Hand. I was going to talk about. Oh, right, right. It's the way that people. It's a way that large organizations collapse. He tells. I remember he used to tell the story of the bankrupt millionaire. The guy goes up to the millionaire, just like, "Wow, you were so rich. How the hell did you lose all that money?" Like you just can't imagine that someone who had that money would just suddenly not have it anymore. People can't imagine spending that amount of money that quickly. And the millionaire simply replies, I lost my money very slowly at first, then very quickly. What that means, well, I mean, it's pretty simple what that means, but you're going to have rumblings. Things are going to start to look bad, but, they're not going to be very significant. They're going to be like, a few rounding errors here, a few inefficiencies there, but over time, those build up those snowball, and and eventually you come to a point of no return where you're screwed. What's going to happen is how this applies to the stock market in the state is that you're going to wake up one morning and things are going to be really, really, really bad. Like the stock markets, you're going to have Black Tuesday. Stock market's going to lose tremendous amounts of its value overnight, and people are just going to be wondering what the hell just happened. Hey, Bunny, what's up?
Not much. How are you doing tonight?
Doing
Just
good?
got off work.
He got banned from Discord last night because he triggered a bunch of SJWs on the right and the left.
So you know he's cool.
Yeah, you should tell that story really quickly.
Uh, yeah, they were arguing about, well, what if there was no state? Then you just would have children being molested as if there would be no values or morals without a state. And I said, you're right, there would be no legal age of consent, but people are not too stupid to realize when and when a kid can't have sex. And then they just freak out like, oh, you're advocating pedophilia. That's what all anarchists want.
Isn't the state full of? Hasn't the state throughout history just been a giant cesspool of pedophiles?
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, at this point, I don't really know how they could say that, considering, that in every government in the world, it seems like there's either overt human trafficking or there are a bunch of pedophile rings centered around where most of society's influence in relation to the state congregates. Like in the US, it's Las Vegas. There is a confirmed one in Las Vegas. Hollywood at this point, it's not confirmed, but I mean, at this point,
It's
with
basically
how much
confirmed.
with how much we know, it is.
When they have to throw those insults at you, they know they have no actual argument against anarchism.
I mean, I
But
was
yeah,
just
what I was getting to is, yeah, with how much, basically the only way that any sort of slavery, let alone human trafficking, could exist is with a state. Considering this is the case, the only way that it could be acceptable and not a criminal action. You'd think that if their biggest concern was that they wanted to be against pedophilia, you'd think they'd be against the state.
No, they just use that excuse because they don't have an argument against the state and they want to force their values on you.
Yeah, my I don't know if it's going to be my next video, but if not, it's going to be one of my upcoming videos. Is going to be my take on the whole cultural degeneracy bit that's been going around, and more specifically, how parasitic and otherwise predatory behavior like that's perpetuated by the state and the
well.
conditions that the state creates for society.
I think I did a video on. I don't remember what I was replying to specifically, but I did touch on that any state that you create which bans degeneracy is going to be powerful enough to mandate it. So the fact
Well,
that you need the fact
that's
that
one of the main problems is that any system which mandates a sort of cultural policy, why would they need to mandate a culture or a way in which people, the customs by which people associate with one another? Why would the state have to encourage this if these customs were inherently good? It seems like the only purpose of the state mandating customs would be to enforce sort of cultural values onto people which are reprehensible and they would never accept otherwise.
Well, my response to them was, well, then let's just ban murder and then people won't murder each other. Let's try that.
I think
In which they flash reported me after that.
for the most part, most of the concerns regarding anarchism ultimately come down to their own personal lack of imagination. For the most part, with some notable exceptions, the people who are skeptical of anarchism definitely have good intentions. They just can't conceive of alternative ways of achieving their goals. which ultimately comes
No,
down
Anyway,
to like,
uh, someone asked in the chat, will the dollar go to zero in the following market crash?
I, I think it will over time. I think it'll end up like the Weimar Republic, where it will just print so much money it'll only be useful for keeping yourself warm.
Yeah, I think in the coming market crash, this is going to be it. I mean, the U.S. dollar is already over 100% inflation. We're like quickly approaching $22 trillion in debt, and on top of that, the government's just expanding and keep spending because we're at this point now where it needs to keep spending in order to sustain itself, essentially. I'm not arguing that this is sustainable for society. Obviously, it's not. But this is the point people need to understand: is that the state is not sustainable. It's not a sustainable model of social infrastructure, and that's precisely why the state doesn't have any assets of its own. It needs to constantly appropriate resources, and as society around it expands, it needs to spend more, which means it needs to appropriate more resources. And by appropriating more resources, people are going to move elsewhere and produce less. So
Well, yeah, my biggest problem with the dollar is there's no cap. Like back when we had actually a gold standard, we actually had a limit how far we could make it. Now it's like, oh, there's no limit anymore. Let's just print trillions of dollars and like, how about we just give everyone a free $1 million because it doesn't really matter anymore. The money is already worthless.
well, the
There's
reason
nothing
why
backing it up.
yeah, the reason we're currently at that point is because since the state doesn't have any assets of its own, it can't produce an actual currency, which is itself valuable as a means of exchange. So the best that they could do is create a reserve note, something which is backed up by a preferred medium of exchange, so people will assign some value to it. But the problem is that they created so much money and they spent so much that no, they wouldn't be able to back up the the they wouldn't be able to back up anyone. Like, they printed more money than they actually had in reserves, so the value of their reserve note declined drastically. This is actually exactly how the Bretton Woods Agreement ended. In 1971, France realized they had more U.S. dollars than the U.S. government claimed to have in its reserves. So all the countries in the world tried to cash in, and they started questioning the government, the U.S. government. So the government simply said, "Yeah, you know what? We're not doing the gold reserve system anymore." We basically scammed the entire world and lied to them.
which is what I think is going to make this particular market collapse, especially the collapse of the dollar, because the dollar is part of the everything bubble, so much more interesting. Think of all the serious collapses, all the hyperinflations throughout history, where governments printed huge and huge and huge amounts of money in order to prop up their own failing economy, but all it did was make the currency so worthless that people didn't even bother counting it when they're trying to buy and sell in it. They're doing that in Venezuela right now, where shops just have scales, where if you have a certain number of pounds or what's the term in the metric? Never mind. If you have a
But that's
certain number of
sorry.
kilograms in dollars, then you can trade with it. But with the dollar, what's going to make that very fun is that it's not just in the US. It's not just we're already like we have QE1, QE2, QE3, QE infinity, but you also have countries around the world who are holding huge amounts of dollars for the sole purpose of being able to trade in petroleum, the
But
petrodollar. We've talked
and
about
that's
this before, but what happens when Russia and China successfully supplant the petrodollar, OPEC collapses, and all that
Yeah,
money comes flooding back.
there are already multiple countries rejecting the U.S. dollar lately because of what's about to happen. India, United Arab Emirates, Russia. I mean, it's going to be bad. I mean, you have no growth occurring in the economy. The currency is going to basically default, and we're going to experience hyperinflation like the U.S. has never seen before.
I don't think the world has ever seen
And
before.
yeah, and the entire world is going to experience something similar. So it's just that's what's going to make this particularly bad is if you were to operate the way that the state wants you to operate, what the fuck are you going to do? And that's precisely what's going to drive everyone to trade in counter economics and why I see this as being the end of the state because this is going the infrastructure created by the state and created currently is basically not going to exist. It's the only way people are trade is among one another, essentially trading around the state, and they're going to be utilizing various means of peer-to-peer associations like cryptocurrencies, mutual aid, etc. And the state essentially there's going to be an infrastructure created around the state which the state can't control because everything is going to be in private ledgers which are encrypted inside of a blockchain network. So what exactly is the state going to do here? On top of this, the state doesn't, they're deprived of resources because um, nobody is paying taxes anymore because the state doesn't know who has what, um, and they can't really regulate trade because they don't. Again, everything's done in private ledgers, so they don't know who has what or where anything is going. So they're not going to have any, they're not going to have any police, or if they do, they're going to be severely underfunded. Like they're only going to have like one or two police per city essentially. And that'll be pretty easy to get around. So I think essentially the state will be innovated out of existence, and people will be driven to counter economics out of necessity to simply live. This is what happened back in the Great Depression. People started trading in gold because what the state was demanding for them to trade with, and all there was just not affordable. Plus, on top of this, the banks, all people's assets were completely dried up. So
Well, you know what's funny during the Great
they
Depression?
started trading gold. But the problem with gold is back then they didn't have private ledgers and cryptocurrency and cryptography, so the state could easily monitor transactions through the banks. And then, hey, can you like move your mic away from your because it's kind of distracting from your mouth because I can hear you breathing. But yeah, and then FDR signed Executive Order 6102, which had the Treasury Department confiscate everyone's gold. Even they even officially claimed that was because people were trying to undermine the banks and the various financial institutions of the state. So I mean, that's even what the order states, the executive order states. People are undermining the government by trying to trade around us, so let's confiscate all their gold. Now they can't do that, so what are they going to do?
Well, they're going to try nonetheless. And even though that they're going to be deprived of tax dollars, you know that's not the only thing that they're going to try to do. They're going to continue to let the money spigot flow. They'll probably invent the new $100 million bill just to be able to pay for
Well,
stuff.
I
Problem
mean,
is that
we're already seeing what they're going to try and do in response. They're trying to convince people that the cryptocurrencies are not, you can trace that the state is able to monitor cryptocurrency transactions, so you have to trade with them.
which
You
is
can see this propaganda popping up everywhere, which incredibly inconsistent about. Like, they'll say, "Oh, it's amazing because you don't have to trade with banks anymore," and that's what basically to explain why people find it appealing in the first place. But then immediately they'll turn around and say, "Well, hey, the state can track it, and you need the state, and it's not as secure as you think." Blah blah blah, and it's like, what the fuck? Like, if you're not careful, the cognitive dissonance there can just completely give you whiplash. Um, yeah, the fact of the matter is that they ultimately don't have any ability to.
that's weird. We're getting some people saying that the stream is there's some problems with the stream.
Oof.
That
Again,
yeah.
really?
Yeah, it's laggy
Oh,
as hell. Like, here's the thing, everything is fine on this end. I heard everything you said, but yeah, I don't know if it's my internet or someone's messing with it, which actually wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, because this is like the third time in a row this has happened.
I honestly think, though, like we don't even really have to worry about the state. 3 to 5 years from now, there's going to be depression here. 2 years following that, every economy will be depressed. And about a year after that, we'll have anarchism. So 7 years tops, there'll be anarchism. It'll be over.
You know that there's going to be several hangers on to statism, and more importantly, I think it's going to feed into the downward spiral of statism. Or, yeah, the downward spiral of statism, where you have a whole generation of people, literally hundreds of millions, who earnestly believe that in order to solve the problem, just get a congressperson. And so what'll happen is that they'll go to they'll once everything starts to go down, they're just like, oh, I know, let's go to the government. Let's get them to wave their magic wand of problem solving. Of course, they'll be completely off guard by what's happened. The state will be completely off guard as to what's happening, and they'll try to spend more money, which will only contribute further to their dissolution since it's going to make the dollar increasingly worthless and drive even more people into the counter economy. So they'll try to spend more money, become even more authoritarian, become even more, well, worthless, or the currency is going to become even more worthless, and eventually it's like you're not going to be able to the cops aren't going to be able to justify continuing to have their jobs because their paycheck is now completely worthless.
Well, on top of that, because people are becoming more self-sufficient necessarily, since they've built this infrastructure around trading on a basis of human action, people are going to start, being armed. People are going to start forming private security firms with cryptocurrency, literal fucking Bitcoin Nick mercenaries. But yeah, even if even if they somehow do manage to gather funding, really at this point they're not going to have nearly enough to try and stop people. I think at this point, because the state will have taken everything from everyone and will have put them in that position. I think out of necessity, people will simply identify the state as their enemy, since the state is trying to crack down on their way of living at that point. I can tell you what, people didn't think very highly of Executive Order 6102 at the time. Well, I can't blame them, considering that the state had completely killed their ability to trade. They were trying to trade around it, and then the state came in and shut that down, took away all their assets, and forced them to trade back in that system, which wasn't working for them. They were starving to death, essentially.
Well, what they're going to do is they're going to try to say, like, yeah, your assets or your transactions in Bitcoin and other crypto, those are taxable, and you need to pay your taxes to the government, which is probably going to be their way of tricking gullible people into revealing who they are. And probably part of that process will be giving away some of your transaction IDs I would not be surprised at all. But
Yeah,
If they can't make
they'll
me
try
do it
to
with
figure
cash,
they'll
if they
try to
can't make me
figure
do it with cash, though, they will not be able to do it with crypto at all.
have you
People are doing
seen?
it with cash already.
Yeah, have you seen? Just recently there was this fucking hilarious panel that was on New Zealand state TV. It's already starting, just to clarify. But yeah, there was this panel, and some of the stuff they were saying was just outrageously funny, and that's why I'm kind of looking forward to this because the propaganda is just going to get so insane because they it's so divorced from everything that these state-run media outlets are used to. They can't really pit it. They can't pit people against one another because everyone's trading around them. They can't make it like a political issue. They'll try everything, and that's what's gonna make it so great. But if you see this, it was fucking hilarious. They cited Paul Krugman, and what I shit you not, one of the things one of these panelists said, like I'll make a response to this soon here, but they cited Paul Krugman and said, "You can't have a currency which is divorced from society, and that's the problem. Cryptocurrency it makes people reclusive, and so that they don't have to give anything to society. And if you can't be taxed, how are you going to have a currency?"
so the basis for money is whether or not it's taxable.
Pretty much.
I mean, that's. I hope she realized like just how stupid she sounded as she said it, because that's the kind of thing that just doesn't make any sense, even if you have no idea how money works or why it does or why money even forms.
But yeah, the same panelist went on later to say that if the state can't infinitely print the supply of currency, can't infinitely just print as much as they want, then a currency can't be stable.
Actually, printing a limited amount is what makes it unstable. Does this woman even know
That's the
economics?
point.
Well,
Yeah, that's
no,
the point.
she's. That's why she's a TV show host in New Zealand.
It's why she thinks citing Paul Krugman is some sort of authoritative stance rather than actually detracting from her credibility.
Well, to be fair, she and Cuck Tuck the Cuck have that in common.
Because at this point, I think very few people, like there are just nobody that take Keynesianism seriously anymore.
Well,
Uh, yeah, you'll hear it propagated by the media and in universities, but outside of there, you'll hear people regurgitating Keynesian ideas. But I mean, they aren't really thinking about it. Or if you pressure them, they have any rebuttal to criticisms to their arguments, like the idea that to stimulate the economy, the state has to spend, that spending is just the key to all economic growth, regardless of if there's any actual, you know,
production.
there's there's any actual production occurring, or there's any actual people are actually having more assets.
This has
You know,
become.
Hey, if spending's the answer, I have a bunch of dirt that people can buy off me. I mean, come on, government, give me $1 million for my dirt. It's spending. It'll help the economy.
I mean, you can pay people $1 million to dig ditches and then fill them up again. That doesn't mean anything's
yeah,
actually being productive. Although to be fair, that's probably the least egregious thing government has ever spent money on,
I
because
mean,
most
literally,
of their employees are anti-productive. They're
I
being
mean,
paid
literally,
to literally cost people money.
according to Keynesians, I mean, that's literally how economic growth works. Paul Samuelson quite infamously cited in a 1986 textbook, this was before the Soviet Union collapsed, um, that the Soviet Union had proven itself to be a more successful economy than the United States, and this was because it had a higher GDP. So essentially, because there was more government spending,
Now, this has become
and
kind of a
and to,
cliche for at least myself to say, because I've been saying this for at least a decade now. If government spending is the key to economic growth, why is there any private spending at all? Why doesn't the public sector just do all the spending for everyone at all times? I think that would be peak efficiency, at least according to that theory.
According to Keynesians. But okay, we're like 40 minutes into the stream. We need to really get on to some of these stories.
Yeah, we haven't really touched on any stories, have we? Well, that's fine.
Mhm.
Bunny, you're
Just one
breathing
last
on the
thing.
mic again.
Sorry, just one last thing. How long do you think it'll be before they say crypto is anti-American?
Uh, about
Couple months, give or
I would
take. Like,
I I'd give it. Let's see, what time is it? My time it is 8:41, so I'll give it a few hours.
I don't know. It's not really possible with 100% certainty to make accurate predictions. It's really a bad habit. I like to try and work my way through things logically, and I generally do a pretty good job. But the fact of the matter is that predicting human action is impossible.
Mhm.
And I just have a good general idea of how the state works. We know that they're going to, like, for example, we know that they are going to eventually say cryptocurrency is anti-American, necessarily when, but yeah, I'd say probably at least within like the next 2 or 3 months if I had to give an estimate,
Mhm. I'm
because yeah, like I mentioned, they're getting really desperate as is. Like they're already doing panels about it on other country state news outlets, and they're starting to riff about it on these so-called late night talk show comedians shows that they have on TV. So
I'm gonna go out on a limb though and say that the U.S. is not going to ban cryptocurrency because banning things is not in the states or not in the current form of the state's modus operandi. They operate in the form of a soft tyranny, which is to say that they don't ban it. Instead, they restrict it, they regulate it, they tax it. They do everything they can to discourage people from getting access. You see this in New
well,
York
not
City, where it
even
takes
if they
like
did, even if they did, it wouldn't matter because, as noted earlier, it's not actually possible to regulate or monitor the transactions because they occur in over a private ledger through a encrypted network.
yeah, but my point is replying to what Black Spruce was saying in the comments, whether or not the U.S. will ban it, and I think that's something that people should look out for. It's not gonna be a hard ban. It's gonna be a soft ban. It's gonna be taxed. It's gonna be regulated. It's gonna be you're gonna have people, pundits and politicians, going on TV saying it's like, oh, we just need to make sure that it's under control. Make sure that people are transacting safely. That it's
Yeah,
not
that's
being
that's
used
going to
for
be that's going to be one of their main propaganda lines is that cryptocurrency is unsafe and that trading in fiat is safe. But yeah, China, for example, banned cryptocurrency and threatened, I think it was like a 10, 15 year imprisonment term for anyone who was caught using it. Their market grew afterwards because people were just like, hey, wait a minute, they can't monitor what we're doing, so who gives a fuck what they think?
And Russia did the same thing, if I recall correctly, and they have entire towns that trade only in crypto.
Yeah, it's still the legal status of cryptocurrency. Like they basically were forced to take to take away that ban that they had because it simply is not an enforceable law.
Hmm. But now I think we should actually get into the actual articles. The first one I think we should talk about is you remember on Tuesday we mentioned the New York City, or not New York City, New York State new law signed that enables abortions to be conducted on the third trimester. So abortion in New York State is now completely legal right up until birth. Well, in the state of Virginia, a bill has been proposed. This isn't law yet, but it's been proposed, and it's low key supported by the Democrat governor that would allow for abortions after birth.
Post birth, literal fucking post birth abortion.
This is a not even a week after we talked about the frickin' third trimester abortions. This is
Yeah, it
post-birth
was Tuesday.
abortions.
It was Tuesday. We talked about the third term abortion issue.
And now we have people who are literally saying, yeah, you know what? We can just kill kids right until they die. Or you can just kill kids right after they're born. Because, we're so progressive. We're so great about making sure women have the right to choose. And
This
what's
almost
even
sounds like a meme. This sounds like a meme we used to say, oh, what's next? Post-birth abortions?
Yeah,
It sounds like a
it
meme.
is.
it's
I actually remember that was one of the comic exaggerations um, that conservatives or just people who were against abortion in general would propose for, the abortion bills inching closer and closer to third trimester, ninth month pregnancy abortions. And yeah, that was one of them. Post birth abortion. So the baby's on the operating table, stab it in the heart and kill it.
here's
I
the
mean, now they're actually trying to do that.
it's actually a lot worse than that. And
Indeed.
you're I think you guys watching are going to be a little horrified, but you probably won't because you probably already know what's up. But there was an interview done with, or not an interview, a Q&A done with the governor of Virginia, who is in support of this law, or this bill. He said that, or when asked about it, he mentioned that the decision will ultimately be up to the mothers and doctors whether or not the child, who is born, by the way, the umbilical cord is out, and it is out of the womb, whether or not it should be kept alive, whether or not it should be resuscitated. I don't know why he used that term specifically, but from the way he worded it, it very, very strongly implies that they aren't going to just twist the kid's head off or stab it in the heart. They're going to just leave it to die, like starve it to death. And that's how this post-birth abortion is going to be carried out. Just let the thing die.
Yeah, that is it's really at this point this I mean, I would say the state is inhuman now, but they've done stuff way worse than this in the past. It's I mean, worse than baby murder. Well, yeah, how about uh baby murder with white phosphorate like they did back in November while everyone was focusing on the midterm elections. Hold on.
No, like seriously though, this is disgusting. If we had like Ancapistan, seriously, people could pay these women who don't want these kids to say, hey, I wanted a kid, but me and my wife can't get pregnant, or a gay couple. Can we adopt it? This would be a much better solution and more humane, and everyone wins. She gets paid for having the pregnancy, and the people get a baby. But no, we live under a state that wants to rather murder little children instead of make it easier to adopt. No, we have to have like 20,000 regulations to adopt. Oh, your house is 1 inch too small? Nope, you can't have a kid. Let's just kill the kid instead. Every day I hate the state more and fucking more. I'm serious.
I understand the feeling because at
Yeah,
this
and
point,
that's an interesting point to bring up that if your house is too small, like if you have too many people living in a certain area or the state doesn't like certain things that you have in your home, even if you're completely fine and the child is completely well taken care of, the state will just simply come in and take your kids away or tell you you can't, have a kid. And so I mean, it could be argued they're encouraging people to have abortions.
which wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, Margaret Sanger, I think we mentioned this before, one of the few famous people who isn't rolling in their graves right now. She is, if she were alive right now, she'd be jumping for joy, just at the
And
amount of
I
mass
mean,
slaughter that has been carried out in the name of which altar are these babies being sacrificed on? What cause is there that could possibly justify this?
and this it's a lot like the minimum wage issue where they keep raising the minimum wage slowly every time exponentially with no sign of it ever stopping, and there's no real argument they have for it stopping. I mean, really, what's next? Are we going to get to the point where if a mom doesn't want to keep their 2-year-old anymore, they could just fucking strangle it to death, and that's considered a post-birth abortion.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, you've heard many of the arguments that pro-abortion people have made. Oh, well, the fetus isn't conscious. I mean, if that's the case, then any coma patient, or even anyone who's ever fallen asleep, it's okay to kill them too.
But, fetuses aren't humans because they're just a bundle of cells. Literally every living thing, both sapient and non-sapient, is a bundle of cells.
I mean, with the
But no,
exception of
no,
single-celled
seriously,
organisms.
you're, but no, seriously, based on the way that they argue for this position, whether or not something is human or non-human and has rights, based on the way they argue for this position, I mean, it sounded outlandish to have post-birth abortions like right on the operating table, but now they're seriously considering it. I mean, it wouldn't surprise based on what we see here and what we know if years or so, if the state's even around, that they'll be arguing for post-birth abortion up to the what how many months, like how many trimesters would it be for someone to be like 3 4 years old? That
Let's see,
might sound like it's gross.
three.
I haven't done the math, and I'm not really interested in it.
Let's see,
It would
three.
be
It would be the
12.
12th trimester. No, 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 no. It would be the 15th trimester.
Yeah, but including the 3 that the baby spends in the womb, so it's the
That's
18th trimester.
well, no,
18th
15 is.
trimester abortion.
I got the 15 by adding 3 to
Oh,
12.
okay. Well, the 15th trimester abortion.
I doubt that they'll even use that term anymore, simply because it'll probably just be simpler to say, like, I don't know, 6th month, 18th month. But I think that'll be the new.
18th month abortion.
That'll be how they're going to push the Overton window towards accepting more and more outlandish, absurd, and demonic forms of ways of murdering people. Oh, I think it's you're gonna have people who unironically argue, oh well, I'm against abortion, but I mean, up until the 6th month, then it's okay.
Even though the very moment that a fetus is created, the moment that an egg is fertilized, the egg develops a separate DNA sequence from the mother. And it's been proven by 5 weeks the fetus has a central nervous system and can feel pain.
I honestly think under anarchism, the only abortions that will actually ever happen are those that are like literally for the life of the mother or the baby's dead in the womb. Because at that point, we won't have restrictive
Well,
laws
the
like I
baby's
said on
dead anyway.
adoption. Yeah,
At that point, the baby's dead anyway. So that's, I mean, it's technically an abortion, but the baby's not dying; it's dead.
yeah. But then those would be the only abortions that would actually be necessary because there's tons of people on list to adopt who can't adopt under anarchism. Those people could just pay someone, and I'm sure any woman would take that 50,000 because it's probably more than most people would be making. Whatever currency we use, would say like $50,000 in American, just to just make an idea. A lot of people would take that. It's like, hey, that's more than I make a year, so it's worth going through the pregnancy. It would be an incentive for them.
Surrogate.
But Bunny, gay people can't have kids; they're icky.
Of course. Well, I mean, you just got to make sure that any excuse they can come up with to prevent people from having their preferences met. I mean, I don't know if gay parents make good parents or not. I don't think there's enough data to quantify that one way or another. But why don't we just find out? The best way to find out is to let people associate voluntarily and figure this stuff out for themselves. There's no way to objectively demonstrate that abortion is justifiable in any sense of the word. It's murder. It's really that simple. You don't need to be religious to come to this conclusion. It's murder because the child has self-ownership and will be able to demonstrate self-ownership.
Well, I'm an atheist, and I see abortion to be against self-ownership. So there you go. You got it from a non-religious point of view.
There you go.
All right, so I guess we've gone on here as much as we can. States murdering babies on a grand scale. So here's something interesting. Apparently, just within like the last few hours, Twitter banned 2,000 accounts that were spreading news and attempting to basically argue against the coup which the U.S. is instigating in Venezuela, and which we went over in Tuesday. But yeah, they banned 2,000 accounts which were spreading counter narratives, and their attempt to justify this is that these were state-backed. This was part of a state-backed influence campaign perpetrated by the Russians. I'm fucking not even making this up.
Suffice to so what happened
Wrong think is a crime.
pretty much. So what happened is that Twitter decided or found 1,175 roughly accounts based in Venezuela who were critical of the coup. Basically just like asking why is it necessary, why is the US meddling, why is the US involved, and whether maybe even saying things in favor of Maduro. Now, don't get any of us wrong. We hate Maduro. Well, hate's a strong word, but we strongly dislike Maduro as much as probably anyone else does. But I can't see any justification for US getting involved in a coup, especially given that the new guy is basically going to be Maduro 2.0, except a little bit less hostile to the US.
Don't you know they need their U.S. puppet? That's why. Oh no, we need the guy who agrees with us. I don't care if he just mass genocides his whole people as long as he does what the U.S. wants. Then who cares what he stands on?
Well, I mean, anyone who's skeptical of the narrative that the U.S. has supported and toppled dictators throughout the world without any rhyme or reason except for U.S. foreign policy just need to be pointed here to see it done in real time. You have a concerted propaganda effort undergone by a U.S. proxy corporation called Twitter that is engaging in censorship to prevent people from seeing ideas counter to the neocon pro-government or pro-US government idea that, hey, we should just be controlling these countries because reasons.
The reason is U.S. is good, all other countries are bad. And when they don't do what we want, we have to make them the U.S. 2.0.
Pretty much. And the US has tried to topple Maduro before. What's the name of that organization in Venezuela that tried to assassinate Maduro twice? The soldiers in T-shirts who used laughably like Looney Tunes style assassination attempts. You had
they tied a bomb to a drone, and they before like they even got it close to Maduro, he was already out of there because everyone saw it coming. And yeah, that group was funded by the CIA. So.
Oh, and there's also the attempt where they had a helicopter drop live grenades on the building, and they detonated it before they even reached the building. I'm telling you, like the soldiers in Looney Tunes, or the soldiers in T-shirts are Looney Tunes characters. Their attempts are absolutely hilarious.
Hey, at least the state gives us something to laugh about. At least we get that.
That's true. Problem is that, well, people in Venezuela are dying, and rather than, figuring some other method of liberating these people, figuring out some way to get the Maduro government to be, a little bit less authoritarian, maybe, I don't know, dismantling their state completely. That might be an idea. Maybe we could try anarchy just once.
Or at least open the free markets, not restrict them from trading with people in the U.S. That would be a good idea.
That might help. But then again, it's a little concerning.
Next story. The ICC being banned from the U.S. because the U.S. is committing war crimes in Afghanistan, and the UN is basically just trying to call out the U.S., but the U.S. Is trying to stop them from doing so. The U.S. government, of course.
So what happened is that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, was doing or has had an investigation being done on the U.S. war in Afghanistan. The what's the term people are using that for that? The Forever War. People they found evidence of significant war crimes being committed, and then the Trump administration decided to get involved, started to meddle, started to insert their own people, started to do all sorts of shenanigans. And one ICC judge from Germany, I believe, decided to quit the organization out of protest because he found that it was impossible to do his job because of just how much pressure the U.S. was putting on the ICC. In other words, what we have is a judge resigning because he hated the extent to which the U.S. was trying to cover up their own war crimes. Or I should say alleged war crimes, because there isn't any proof, at least in this particular instance, that war crimes were committed. It's just an investigation into war crimes that might have been committed. But the fact that the Trump administration is getting this involved might be evidence enough.
The investigation occurred, and that's what they concluded with, that the U.S. was involved in war crimes, torturing people specifically.
Yay. Suffice to say, well, again, you can see all sorts of everything that's been horrible about U.S. foreign policy since World War I is on full display for the world to see right now. You just need to look in Venezuela, and you need to look in Afghanistan. The U.S., I'm sorry conservatives, but the U.S. is not a force for good. It is, in fact, in many cases, a force for evil, especially in Syria. But Syria is neither here nor there for the moment.
Oh, hey, here's so I mean, there's not really much more to say about this story, but hey, something that I've been warning people about from the beginning, like a couple months ago. I think I remember we went over this about those those websites which are collecting DNA from people to show people what their lineage is.
Let me guess.
Well, guess what? Trump signed a new bill called the Rapid DNA Act, which will allow the FBI to take the information that these companies are collecting.
Really now?
And I was telling people from like the very beginning, we were covering a story related to Family Tree DNA or GED Match, one of these online Ancestry.com, one of these lineage websites. And yeah, I was telling people, don't fucking send your DNA to these sites. What the government is, these are basically just proxies for the government, and in I don't know how long, but eventually the state is going to collect this DNA and use it to try and collect more information on you. I warned about this back in like I think it was September, and here I am being fucking vindicated.
You were proven right. Excellent work. Yeah, just in general, be very. I think just if it's not obvious now to not send their DNA to the sites, we have hard proof that you definitely shouldn't. These people are really creepy, if nothing else, in addition to being really evil.
If you want to know your heritage, speak to your grandparents. They'll tell you tons of stories that can answer those questions for you.
Or, your parents. Of course, you might be Elizabeth Warren, and your parents and your family might be incorrect, but, I mean, it's not really terribly important, I don't think. Not unless
Better
you
to
have,
be incorrect and wrong than correct and unsafe.
That's right. I mean, it's only important if you're worried about Parkinson's or something like that. But since the majority of people don't have to worry about that, don't send your DNA to people on the internet. This should go without saying. Don't send your password to random people on the internet. Don't send your telephone number to people on the internet. Don't send your DNA to people on the internet. This isn't complicated.
But yeah, I think we went over everything. So
Yeah.
it's been an hour. So anyone
Yes.
want to share?
Yep. I think we're just about done here. Everybody, do your
Yeah,
stuff. Do your thing.
I'm going to show real quick. Check out my website, bunnyism.com, BUNNYISM.com. It's a new blog I started. I try to post every 2 weeks. And that's about all I have to show.
Well, I'm Esoterica Free. I've got a couple of projects coming up. All of them are incredible, are incredibly anticipated, and yeah, I don't know if you can hear that, but there's some very loud fighting going on in the background. I apologize.
All right, and I think most of you know who I am. Filthy Heretic. I've got some unspecified projects being worked on myself, and hopefully I'll have a Patreon Q&A video very soon. So thank you for stopping by, and we'll see you next week. Bye.